Hi, everybody. Welcome to Behind the Curtain, where producers are talking about accessibility in gaming and how to incorporate it into the development of our different projects. I'm Amethyst Begley. I am working as a producer with Arkane Austin, and I see we have other producers. Who are you? Mihai, would you like to go first? Introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Mihai. I'm a producer at Ubisoft Ukraine. Um, my team is an associate team working for tech and accessibility for an announced AAA project.
Hi, I am Dr. JC Lau. I am a senior producer at ProbablyMonsters, currently working on an unannounced project. Before that, I was at Harebrained Schemes, where I worked on BattleTech, one of the core technologies team, and an unannounced project. There, I also helped drive accessibility work and helped write a studio accessibility policy. And before that, I was at Bungie, where I founded the Bungie Diversity Committee and worked on Destiny 2 and its first year of expansions.
Excellent.
Hi everyone, I'm Angela Lee. I'm a senior game producer for World of Warcraft at Blizzard Entertainment. I've been in this role for 4 years, focusing on user interface and accessibility. And before that, previously I was 7 years as QA analyst for World of Warcraft, so a total of over 11 years working on World of Warcraft.
Impressive. Well, I'll start us off with the first question, and it kind of ties in to a little bit of your background. So feel free to either go a little bit more in depth into it. But the first question is, how did each of you become aware of accessibility in gaming? And the part that you might want to go more in depth on is, versus your introduction was, how did you come into the current role and become the advocate that you are?
I can take this one. So the first contact with accessibility was on Watch Dogs 2, where we developed many options for PC, like a multiple save system, customizable controls page, input adaptation, and video options menu. And after that, we realized that we can significantly do more, explore and improve for all platforms. We started learning about CVAA. We started to think how we can improve on the system, and how we can end up adding a wide range of features by iterating on the basic ones. So this led us to the next project, Watch Dogs Legion, in which, having a dedicated accessibility team, we managed to add on top of the things that we learned from Watch Dogs 2, and to improve a lot on all platforms. Like the easiest example to give you, we had the subtitle speaker name, and on top of that, we had the audio captions for gameplay information, for explosions, sirens, shooting, different actions in the game. These were completely customizable, so you could display up to 2 or 4 events in the same time. And even more, we added captions, directional arrows. Those were highlighting where something was happening within the radius of the player, like different sounds or different actions, important for the players to have a visual input on the screen.
Yeah, that is super helpful, right? To give people more than one way to have that communication be received.
That's exactly right, because after some internal playtests with some accessibility advocates, we managed to get this feedback that we had a bunch of UI elements popping on the screen, useful for understanding where to go in the mission, what to do, where is the map, all that cool stuff. But we didn't have anything for the hearing impaired persons to showcase what is happening in the moment, like the actions that are happening around the player in that specific moment. So we took this feedback and we tried to implement it, and we did eventually.
Yeah, and what I like about a lot of accessibility features is how much it crosses over. So it's not just like it's not just serving one person or one disability or one, like there's just a lot of benefits that are picked up and provided for a lot of different players.
Yeah. And I'll also say, like, with the directional hearing like feature, I actually use that because part of my accessibility journey is I'm effectively disabled. Like I have, like, I mean, I've worn glasses since I was 7. I have like some hearing loss in one ear. So it's like my directional hearing is not super great. And so having those features has been really useful for me. Also for me, like the way I got into accessibility was like, it's actually kind of selfish because it's like stuff that I need. So I used to do a lot of roller derby, and a few years ago, I actually like got multiple concussions from it. So I had a traumatic brain injury, and it led to things like getting migraines when I see certain color combinations, or if I see flashing lights, like strobing effects on the screen. It also meant that I had certain like attention issues, so like I couldn't like focus on it. Like if there's a lot of UI elements on the screen, I'm just like, I don't know what's going on here. Like, so also just because roller derby is one of those sports, I also had my fingers run over at one point, so they don't actually straighten. This is as straight as they go. So I don't know if y'all can see that at home, but yeah, it's so basically this affects my ability to like hold a large controller or like repeatedly click a mouse. I get muscle fatigue. So for me, going into accessibility is functionally advocating for myself and other people who might not have that voice in a studio. And that's kind of where I approach this from. So seeing things like the directional arrows in like knowing which way like even voiceover or sound effects are coming from, or being able to have the option of even just like, when you have a save game and you have like the little screenshot that's like, here's what you were doing, like, that has been really useful for me. Like remappable controls have been great because one of my hands is busted. So just having those options just makes something that I love doing, which is playing games, like so much easier for me to not have to worry about like, how do I need to navigate this space, and being in the room where those games are made and being able to advocate for it there is a way for me to just lend that voice. Like I am not a monolith in terms of my expertise in like different areas of accessibility, but I can at least speak to some of these things and hopefully that will get surfaced. So that's how I got into it.
Yeah, it kind of has like an echoing effect, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and also I guess I also do a lot of work in other DEI spaces in the games industry, and I would like absolutely love to elevate accessibility to those same levels of visibility that these other areas get. So this is also why I'm here, I guess.
How I got in, I initially was an internal tools producer, and when moving over to the user interface team, the player feedback email, accessibility@blizzard.com, also were forwarded to me. It's like, oh, the user interface producer usually gets this. So I've been reading every email and documenting the feedback for the team so they can reference the frequency and volume of certain requests from our players. And then from reading players' feedback, I will say, I will admit, I was coming from a place of ignorance before reading a lot of the feedback. But, reading all it has really impacted me emotionally. And I became invested in helping improve accessibility of World of Warcraft. I hear people's, requests of like, I would like to play this game, but I can't because of X, Y, and Z. And it's like, at the end of the day, we just want as many people as possible to play our games and to enjoy our games and have it as a way of escaping, right? Day to day, I work really closely with our senior user researcher, Dr. Nikki Crenshaw, and she's very, very passionate about accessibility, and I have learned a lot from her. She has been source of a lot of the knowledge and feedback from players, so I'm very thankful to have someone to kind of be by my side and show me the ropes of game accessibility as well.
Yeah. I also am coming from a place of ignorance. I mean, I have an ingrained belief that representation matters. And I know that my experience isn't the one and only experience, but I don't have nearly the imagination of the different experiences that every person on this planet has. And I nobody does, right? But when I get to experience things through other people's lives, which games afford us, right? We become better and richer for it. And when I started working with Arkane Austin, one of the roles as a producer for me specifically was as an accessibility champ. That's the title of my role, where I'm the liaison with the accessibility teams that encompass a lot of the different studios for Microsoft, Xbox, and ZeniMax. So I have a huge resource, and so now suddenly my eyes are open to how much planning needs to go into it, how many voices are collected, and how many other studios have had these challenges presented and how they overcame them in order to provide a more accessible game. And so that's how I came into it, and that's how I became this particular role, and that's why I'm so passionate for this opportunity.
Awesome. I would like to know everyone's lessons and challenges of like balancing accessibility features versus game features, and with the consideration of scheduling too. It's a pretty meaty question.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start, because I think of all the teams and all the projects here, my team is in the earliest stage of development right now. So we just entered pre-production. So you will not see anything about the project I'm working on for several years. But in order to enter pre-production, we ProbablyMonsters requires that a team submits a series of what we call artifacts. So artifacts are things like you have to give them a copy of your first playable build. You have to submit your budget and headcount, your development roadmap, your technical documents, your live ops plan, like design documents, etc. So there is no, at this point right now, this is a developing process, but at this point, there was no like formalized accessibility plan that you had to submit. So what we ended up doing was we were like, well, we know we want to put accessibility features in, so why don't we just build this into our design documents and into our technical documents and make sure that we are thinking about accessibility and including it from the outset. So I like that, there's that old, I think it's an old adage at this point, like accessibility is like making a blueberry muffin. Like you have to bake the accessibility and you can't just shove the accessibility at the end, because then that's not really a blueberry muffin, or that's not really accessibility. So when we were building our design documentation, for example, we talked about how do we do nonverbal player communication? How do we do button remapping? What does this look like across these different pillars of accessibility? And because it's built into our documentation, it's something that we can refer to like regularly, because it's already kind of like part of the official plan. So I will say we're very lucky because we're doing this from the outset. I think there are ways that you can do this if it's not there from the outset. So if there is, I'm just going to come out and say this. I do not believe that there is any gameplay feature that is so precious and integral to your game loop that design cannot integrate accessibility in and accommodate it later. So if it's not there from the outset, the thing that is getting you is really the other parts of, the producer iron triangle, like, your budget or your timing is the thing that is going to bump up against accessibility. So building them into the schedule early makes it easier to account for. But I'm curious, like, what do you do if it's not there right from the outset? Like, because y'all are in different parts of development. So I'd love to hear what you have to say about this.
I can go next. I can answer at least that. For me, we're definitely full on production, and the accessibility that we're trying to bring in at this point. There are some wonderful developers who have been advocating for and putting in basic common sense accessible features, but coming in at this phase in our production cycle, like you said, trying to put blueberry muffins in, it would have been a lot easier, or blueberries right into that muffin. It would have been a lot easier earlier if it had been part of the long-term plan. And so at this stage, it is really, we are up against timelines and making the best choices that we can. And it's been It's been a challenge at times, and overall, the biggest takeaway that I've got is, the earlier the better. That's what I want to do in the future projects, and then just do what we can while we're still in development.
Mihai, how about you?
Yes, I agree with you guys completely, 100%. And I got a bit lost because I was reminding myself the challenges that we had for the previous project and how we are trying right now to improve on the current one. And yeah, that's very important. Start as early as you can. We kind of went with the blueberry muffin approach on the previous one, and we kind of tried to patch it into the project, into the product. So what we did, we had our team and we had our plans, and we tried to adapt those plans to already ongoing project and product. So it was difficult. Why? Because we had to align with the direction, and all the directors from all the cells had their direction, and we came, and suddenly they were like, "Well, what is going on? So stop. We have to take this into account because this has to fit for the release of the game." So it was challenging to explain, challenging to align, and also to implement the mentality of accessibility into the ongoing already production. We joined after alpha, so already the game was in production. We took that learning, however, and today on the current project, we are trying to implement it as early as possible. We are trying to bring together the directors for them to be the ones advocating for the importance of accessibility. What we are doing is on a weekly basis, bringing everyone into the same room and for 1 hour, just try to update each other about the findings, ideas, maybe some plans, and try to find a common goal. As you know, for Ubisoft, it's kind of the associate studio mentality. So we have different teams in different parts of the world working together, and that can be amazingly useful, but also amazingly difficult to manage. So we have one advocate in each studio for each cell that comes forth and tries to take learnings, try to enforce good practices, and yeah, we are trying to get together on this. So that's a very important part. Start early and start developing with accessibility in mind. Anything. Because in the end, you will see that accessibility touches everything, so you cannot escape it. No matter how hard you try, yeah.
WoW was released back in 2004, so I guess going with the blueberry muffin analogy, we have no blueberries in our muffins. We have a lot of tech debt to address, so it's been challenging to bring WoW up to modern game accessibility standards. And when we do build out new systems and tech, we are rebuilding them with accessibility in mind. Sometimes features that impacts how World of Warcraft plays. For example, we're introducing interact key in Dragonflight. Those kind of things tend to need more playtesting internally to make sure we're taking the right steps towards making the game more accessible without affecting how World of Warcraft is meant to be played right now. The WoW team, in terms of scheduling, the WoW team has been dedicating some development time each update to further expand our features and options. And because we're a multiplayer game and a live service game, we face challenges of certain accessibility features being used for botting and cheating. So features will also run through our risk team to make sure we're not accidentally introducing an exploit on a mass scale. There's always more polish improvements from the minimal viable product. We always need to release something, and sometimes it's tough to I don't mean to release a feature when it's not ready, but sometimes accessibility features, we can always do better on them, but sometimes we also have to draw the line somewhere and launch the feature and then go back to polish it later after receiving more player feedback. So those are the struggles we're dealing with. Like one of my first accessibility features was the text-to-speech and speech-to-text support. And after doing extensive user research and play testing, we really uncovered a lot of feedback and polish that we should have considered in the first place. And it was definitely, there was a lot of lessons learned from that in terms of considering user research and understanding how players will use this feature and then building a system off of that. So next time we build big accessibility features, we want to study more on like how it should be used. What are the struggles still if we implement the minimal viable product? Like what is still lacking for the users that will end up using it? Yeah.
I really like that idea of just like, you know, if it doesn't make it into the blueberry muffin, like if the blueberries are not in the muffin to start with, like make a blueberry frosting or something, like, you know, like patching something in later is still better than not having it at all. And especially as producers, like, you know that there are features that will be cut, or you know that there are features that won't make launch, or if you join post-launch, like what do you do? And I really like that idea of like there is always room for accessibility, and you can always like patch to this even if it's not there at the outset, and you can always, and it goes to that mindset of always constantly trying to improve your product.
Yeah, I mean, we've all seen it too with different titles where you know, they're able to turn the ship around on the accessible front and provide a solid game, and it's so good and satisfying to see that happen. From watching from the inside looking out, you're like, yes, you did it, cheering them on.
Does someone else have a question?
Yes, I have a question. I want to know what learnings through mistakes you had on previous projects that you consider bringing to future ones.
Yeah, I can go ahead and get started with this one. For myself, it's really kind of the moment I'm experiencing now is I want to have gone back in time and been a part of this and you know, part of design. Like this is exactly where we're talking about accessibility and how does that thread out into the different departments. That's what I want to do in future projects. That's my short answer. Honestly, that's the biggest learning I could ever share. It's like from design, put it in there.
That's the most controversial part, I think, the design of the accessibility. There are so many things to take into account, and I remember the game designer that I worked with on Legion was an incredible guy, and he struggled so much to find ways that things are working. For example, I remember something related to your previous mentioning, Angela, about aiming system. We had something similar, and we had kind of the similar challenge that our aiming system, which was an advanced aim lock-on, that will allow players to use just one hand with the controller and basically finish the game. So you can actually finish the game with one hand. And we had this challenge that we didn't know how to tackle that allowed other players to cheat in multiplayer. But actually, my idea was that there was so much documentation and there was so much trial and error in the beginning. So what I'm trying to say is that you have to have an open mind approach when you start thinking about accessibility. You'll have a lot of things to cover, and there will be a lot of documentation, a lot of things that will be cut from the game, and a lot of things that will remain to be released. But this should not disappoint you in any way. You need to push forward, because this is kind of the process of iteration that happens for any game. But for accessibility, it's more complex because it touches so many parts of the game. And what I think it's also important to take into account with this iteration process, you need to have a team that can handle it. a dedicated team, and this helped us a lot to have different specific profiles for the entire duration of development working on those features. Because you have, like, on a big scale project, you have this instinct to kind of change and play around with resources, to say, hey, maybe you can do that, maybe help me with that, maybe there is this for you. But for accessibility, we kind of have the team focused, and they did only that, and it helped us a lot to have the product from start to finish in good shape and with good iterations.
You know, if I might interject, that's also something that's something that I've learned on my current project, is like how much stuff evolves, not just, you know, in the development of the game and of course iteration, but what you learn, like the things you learn, that you can always just grab it, pocket it, and apply it in a patch or in another project. Just taking a lot of comfort that you do the best that you can with what you've got, and you keep pushing to do better, and do what you can with what you know. And I just take a lot of comfort in that. And I also am so happy with the level of communication that is the information that's out there in general, which I'm sure we'll touch on in the very soon. But I just you know, talking about learnings and putting them into the next project, like that's something else that you learn while you're in it. You're like, if only I knew so much. Well, you don't, and you didn't, and now you do.
I've definitely made a mistake recently. I forgot to loop in game design leadership on accessibility feedback thread that had a really quick turnaround for implementation. Like, the engineers were really excited about, like, we want to help with this motion sickness problem, and the turnaround, it was very easy to implement. And the setting allowed players to drastically change how World of Warcraft is meant to be played. So when we realized that it caused like unintended side effects, we instead we modified the version of the implementation to still help with the motion sickness, but remove the portion that was unintended. But you know, the public was able to try a little bit and be like, oh, you know, what the heck, it got taken away. And, you know, lesson learned for me is, like, I always need to loop in game design leadership when changes can affect the whole game. And we don't want to put out something that may disappoint players by taking it away after, if, you know, it was unintended.
Yeah. I will absolutely second that, because I think one of the biggest learnings I've had in this area is just fostering those relationships with your dev team. So as producers, we're often like, you know, we're working with the team to create the product, but we're not working directly on the actual feature. And yeah, one of the things I've had to learn is just not to be afraid to ask my designers and my engineers and my UI artists and my whoever to kind of reframe their vision of what that feature is, so it will accommodate accessibility. When I was earlier in my career, we were working on a project where, so this was actually something that came out of Battletech, and we had, like, you know, you have the mechs and they shoot the other mechs, and there's a line that kind of shows you the trajectory of what the where you're going to hit. And we're like, well, we can change the colors of these lines, like, so to accommodate like various color blindness. And one of the challenges there was the colors that we would have to change them to were not in the initial vision for the color palette that the UI team was using. And so it became okay, well, how do we do this? Like, you know, how do we, like, we want to accommodate this, but this meant we would have to redo a lot of the UI. And, you know, like I said before, like, the challenge is not that people don't want to do accessibility. The challenge is how does this bump up against things like budget and timeline and that sort of stuff. So for us, we just kind of sat down and we were just like, okay, well, what are the goals of this feature? The goal of the feature is to make sure that the player can see where their shots are going to land. Okay, how do you meet the goals of this feature and the intended play experience while also still putting accessibility in? And this is why I'm just really strongly of the belief that there is nothing so precious about any particular design that you cannot put accessibility in, because you just have to ask the right questions and have that relationship on your team where people trust that, like, you know, everyone is going to still create a great player experience, but a great player experience for more players. So yeah, I think for me that, like, just making, like, echoing what Angela said, like making sure that you have those good relationships on your team is really a key factor in learning.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Mihai, I cut you off earlier. Did you have more to say? I'm sorry.
I just remembered and heard you addressing it, communication, and for me, a learning was as well would be to learn from other teams and other projects, and we found out, but a bit later for the previous project, and that was a bit of a letdown because it could have helped us a lot in budgeting to kind of approach differently the tech limitations for engine, for example, and also the challenges that we had on UI, because JC, you were mentioning about scalable UI, and we had kind of the same issue, and having that addressed later in the project is a mess. It's delicate. We managed it, but it required additional resources and budget. And yeah, those are things that definitely I will have them in mind for the next project.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Actually, with the speech to text and text to speech, WoW was the first game within Blizzard to implement that, but we had it on the Battle.net app, and we learned from their UX research on how to approach it and kind of keep that design also consistent. And then Overwatch 2 is the second game to support that. And so they reached out and, you know, asked, like, we're implementing this, like, what did you learn from your implementation? And, you know, how can we take the right approach to implementing this feature as well? And we also wanted to share some tech, so we didn't have to, you know, do more work that is unnecessary. So great point, Mihai.
Yeah, I also do want to touch on, we've mentioned budget a little bit, and that was also one of the other learnings I had. Like, accessibility requires budget, the tech requires budget, consultants require budget. Like, just making sure you have those line items in your budget as early as possible to account for these is really important as well, because yeah, like sometimes if you are adding a feature in order to make it accessible, it's going to take more time, it's going to take more overhead, it's going to take more, like, you know, money to make this. And sometimes, like, if you are making it a big expensive feature, like, you have to be able to factor in the cost of accessibility into this. So just one of the learnings that I also took from working at a smaller studio and doing accessibility work was just shoving that line into, like, that line item onto the budget, making sure that accessibility is represented there. So we had funding to, like, we were looking at working with consultants. So just making sure that they were being paid equitably, they had time, and they had time to actually do the work properly, and we had time to iterate on what their feedback was as well. So that was one of the other things that people, like, sometimes people forget to, like, this stuff is iteration and it does take time. So yeah.
That's a good point, JC. And one last thing for me, indeed, working with consultants is very important for us, to mention David Tisserand and Cherry Thompson. So two that are kind of advocating at the group level the importance of accessibility and involving themselves in every project. And that's really interesting to have a person coming from a culture of accessibility, going to the kind of project-oriented production mindset of managing budget, resources, and shipping in time and without errors, the perfect product. And it's interesting to kind of interject and try to find a way to implement that mentality in the because you need to change a bit to get out of your shell, out of your desk, and try to see the open world, try to think about the community, try to think about players, maybe setting up some playtests, talking to some people, and it changes radically your view on the product. And that's also another thing that I want to share with all of you, and maybe some learning that you need to get out and try the community, try it out as early as possible, maybe with your betas, your playtests, as much as you can gather feedback and act on that feedback. Also, the players, they need to see and to feel the progress that you have on your product.
Cool. All right. So I guess as we are wrapping this up, I am curious to know, just given what your accessibility journeys have been so far and like how you got into these roles, like what advice do you have for other producers or developers who are out there who want to make more accessible games? Like what resources are there and how would you advise them on how to start?
Mihai actually covered some of this a little bit, but like play testing, listening to player feedback, and learning what accessibility options are offered in other games, looking at how different options have positively impacted gamers with disabilities. And, I mentioned earlier, we utilize our user research team to help us learn and understand how disabled gamers navigate and play WoW. But I feel like if developers don't have a user research team, there are also lots of amazing streamers and content creators out there with disabilities that can help developers understand struggles just from watching them stream and trying to like navigate around, the various games they play. In terms of training, a group of us on each game team are certified with APX, accessible player experiences from abled gamers. And we have been spreading the knowledge to our development teams about like what we learned from the certification. I have learned a lot from the course, and it was honestly what kickstarted my confidence to advocate for more accessible features. But another free option is Microsoft. They offer an online course called Gaming Accessibility Fundamentals. That's also really great. So I just spreading more awareness, getting people to understand and empathize the struggles of disabled gamers, and yeah, that's a bit.
I so totally agree. A couple of points also from my side, and having accessibility in your demos, I think this you guys agree, and we agree that it's very important. It's not only about having it in demos, but also gather the feedback and act on that feedback. Also, a couple of more important points. We were mentioning starting early, having a dedicated accessibility team for your scope, defining the mandate as well. What do you want from accessibility? How it ties in your product? What are your tech limitations, design limitations? Also, another important one is look at the competition. Check out what they're doing and see the community feedback for each game that it's out there, and try to assess it and try to make the best out of the tech that is out there. I think it's important to have a specialized test team dedicated for accessibility that can like evaluate your product on a constant basis, and that can provide you useful feedback. And aligned with that is to have for production constant reviews, internal reviews dedicated for this accessibility, led by your directors, led by the guys that are driving the product. And the last point from my side would be to work with the community advocates, learn about community needs, and try as much as to get close through your product to the community, and good things will happen for sure.
Yeah, what a robust answer. Like I can't even touch that. I think the only thing I can mention again is there are so many resources out there that even if you don't have much of a budget, I just know that I'm able to access a lot of different points of view, from articles thankfully a lot more attention is being paid to accessibility. So there's a lot more articles from renowned magazines, especially gaming centric ones, that are focusing on that and amplifying the often ignored voice of those in need of accessibility. And I guess the only other thing I would add is just buy-in. Get buy-in as much as you can from the teams, and don't worry about being the squeaky wheel, because that's what you're there for, right? And that's what we want, is we want a game that's enjoyed by as many people as possible, able to experience all of that hard work that's going into our respective titles. And then, of course, as you said, Mihai, that there was listening to your competitors. But what I love is stuff like this panel and other conferences that that allow you to learn alongside, because maybe competition breeds innovation, but it also can build community.
Yeah. I'm just like, I don't know how to follow that. But I will say, on the point of buy-in, I think there is something really, really important there. As producers, we are often also the stewards of our team, like our team's culture and our team's health. And so I think one thing that is very easy and does not cost anything to do, that you can do right now, is just fostering that sense of accessibility awareness on your team. So it goes into that community building thing within your development team. So so when I was at Harebrained, we had a thing called Producer Homeroom, where all the producers would come together and we would spend an hour a week just like watching GDC talks or whatever, and just like, so we had like a shared experience for learning. But you can also do things with your development team, like watch GAconf videos together, watch, like, Angela suggested, like watching like streamers play this, like watch this as a team. And this is not only a bonding experience for your team to do something like this together, but you're all learning, and that just elevates that experience and expertise of people, like knowing what the accessibility issues are. So I think that's a very like easy, low cost thing you can do. So if you don't have a very big accessibility like specialized team, or you don't have user research, like this is just something you can start doing. One thing we also did was Able Gamers has these things called the APX flashcards. So they're adorable. I highly recommend it if people get them from the store. It's like a flashcard, and it has like, an accessibility issue on it. And you can use these as like a practice mechanism to just learn about different accessibility issues. And we just had a bunch as a team, and we would just use them on each other. And it was great. It was just like super fun. It's like, when it's fun, but also educational, and you don't realize you're learning stuff.
Best way to learn, right?
Yeah.
I was trying to find me. I went off camera a little bit to try to find my set, but I couldn't reach them. So.
Yeah. But like, look them up. They're great. So like, I wish I had them with me as well, but they're just fantastic. And it was just lovely just to do that as a team bonding exercise, in addition to just reading like accessibility guidelines or, reading UR feedback. It was just fun to learn.
Yeah. This is a really good talk, and we're fast approaching the 45-minute mark. So any last words from anybody? Any thoughts, questions, anything you want to advocate for besides accessibility?
I think, it takes a lot of patience, both on the game development side and on the player, for advances for this. So, a lot of times it may be slow, but I think as long as people are respectful of delivering the feedback, and keep not allow feedback to be hostile, and just be patient, I think it will get through to all game developers. And I'm sure a lot of them are listening, and they want to do the best they can.
Yeah. And Angela, if I cut you off at all with like, oh, we're running out of time,
Oh, no.
please take whatever time you do need to get your answer in for the question that you may not have had the time to.
No.
But thanks, everybody. It was really great to meet all of you.
Yeah, thank
Thank you.
It was great.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Bye, everybody. Let's wrap it up.
Yeah.
Let's close that curtain or keep it open. I don't know.
Bye.
All right. Bye.
Cool. Thank you, everyone.